June 23rd, 1991. I may not have even been a concept yet, but a certain blue hedgehog had just made his explosive debut. Our favorite blurry little guy, Sonic the Hedgehog, in his first game. His entrance made such a splash when he came out that they could make claims of him taking on Mario, and it could be taken seriously. Those two are good buddies now, but before the Olympic Games came to squash the beef, they made some real great rivals in the industry. From his first game and the promotional material surrounding it, you could already get a vibe from this guy. A snarky, rad dude with a proper heart of gold. Compared to what the franchise would tackle in the future, the story of his first game may have been relatively simple, but it did great work laying the foundation of Sonic as a character, as well as his world. It had to have been to propel him to the level of stardom he achieved. Eggman, still Robotnik to most of the world at this point in time, touches base onto South Island, searching for the Chaos Emeralds and mechanizing the landscape and its inhabitants in the process. Then Sonic catches wind of the I'm smart. Then Sonic catches wind of the Doc's evil plot and comes to put an end to it and save the island. Easy to follow, but it really endeared people to these two characters, Sonic especially, of course. As the years went by and the games kept coming, we could see the stories continuously becoming more and more ambitious. By Sonic 3, we had plots of manipulation, betrayal, and hedgehog-related prophecies of beating giant emerald thieves in games without any dialogue, and people loved them. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is one of the most beloved games even today, not just for its gameplay, but for the stories it told and the theories it still continues to spawn. People care for these characters and the world that they live in. Those things matter, and I think most would say they continued to do a bang-up job in that regard for many years to come. They knocked it out of the park with both style and substance, with my personal highlight being the Sonic CD intros and outros. US or JP doesn't matter in this case, all the songs that they used for these rocked. Even if the JP OST is overall better, don't at me. Once I was among the world of the living and actually gained consciousness, always seemingly at age 4 for whatever reason, and I eventually got my hands on the Sonic Mega Collection amongst other games on our starter GameCube haul, it was those animations from Sonic CD that I'd watch over and over again no matter the occasion. I'd turn on the game, watch the animations. Games kicked my ass, watch the animations to hype myself up. Finally beat said game, watch the animations in celebration. Those animations meant something to me, man, cause they just showed Sonic being his best self, and it always inspired me to be even a fraction of how cool and stylish he was in those things, most typically by trying to mimic his speed and flow in-game. They knew how to really move me from so early on in their career, and they continued to do so for many years to come, with the most notable ones next up being the two adventure games, coming out in 1998 and 2001 respectively. Now, the adventure games were a true step up when it came to the character work and stories that they could tell with them, not only from the hardware upgrades and jump to 3D, but from having fully voiced characters all with their own stories to go through. Adventure 1 did this with individual characters, while Adventure 2 opted to group them up into hero and dark stories instead. But let's start with 1. Since we have to unlock the stories one by one in SA1, we'll start with Sonic's story, but let's be honest, I think most of us would have started with Sonic's story anyways. We open to a few establishing shots of Station Square, one of the main hubs of the game, with its upbeat little theme following a police helicopter just flying through the city. And funnily enough, Tikal is actually following closely behind. I don't know how I never noticed that before. Anyways, just your classic Tuesday night. But as soon as we catch a glimpse of our boy Sonic, the instrumental of his theme, It Doesn't Matter, starts playing, and you can just immediately tell, oh yeah, that's my dogs right there. The energy was just right, and we catch him just leaping from rooftop to rooftop as one does, and drops this iconic line,
oh yeah, this is happening,
and catches wind of a major police chase, opting to drop down and see what the problem is. Just a little detail I like in the voice work here though, is how energetic that Sonic sounds in his first line, but that changes to genuine concern when he sees the commotion.
What's up?
Probably innocuous in the grand scheme of things, but I just like little details like that. After the police fumbles the situation by trying to shoot a being made of water with bullets, our boy steps in and handles the situation so well that creature had to run away like a little wuss. Then we catch a view of Eggman also chilling on a rooftop, cackling about the potent power of this creature as well as its name, Chaos, the god of destruction. Now, this isn't meant to be a plot summary, so I'm not gonna go over every person's stories, maybe just a few key points here and there, but I just had to include this intro here because this was our first look at a fully voiced game Sonic. How he sounds, how he speaks, how he acts, we got to see this to a degree that wasn't possible before in a game. There were shows that existed, of course, but I think most people are able to differentiate Game Sonic from his counterparts that appear in the shows or movies, and this was a whole new step up on the gaming front. We could finally see our video game lad in all his voice acted glory, and I think that was great. In just this short little sequence, we could pick up on the rad dude that drew so many people to Sonic in the first place, but also that he's plenty capable. He's a little cocky, but he can absolutely back that up, and he keeps that energy up for the entire game. Then throughout the rest of Sonic's story, we get to see more of his fights with Eggman and Chaos, his adventures, dare I say Sonic adventure? Thank you. I'll be here all week. And his dynamic with Tails, and the start of the unraveling of the mystery behind Chaos's origins, both through Tikal's flashbacks and Sonic's Lost World stage. Hey, wait a minute. Sonic's character was on point here, not just for the energy and style points, but also the trust he had in his friends, and the care and understanding that he was able to extend to others, even his enemy in the case of Chaos. I think a great show of how much he believes in his buds was with Amy and Gamma. To Sonic, Gamma was just another Eggman robot to take care of, but once Amy stepped in to keep him from destroying Gamma, saying that he's her friend, he backed off without any hesitation. Despite being confused, understandably, he trusted Amy's judgment and left things to her. And we can see that sympathy towards Chaos I mentioned as the story progresses. For most of the game, Sonic simply didn't know much of anything about Chaos, viewing him as nothing but another tool of a monster that Eggman was using to further his own goals. But once he starts to learn about Chaos's origins, in the final story especially, he really changes his tune. He realizes the torrents of pain and hatred burning inside of Chaos, and despite Tikal's suggestion to seal Chaos back inside the Master Emerald, he knows that won't actually solve anything. Instead, he opts to quell the turmoil inside of Chaos by harnessing the positive energy left in the Chaos Emeralds after Chaos absorbed merely their negative energy. This allowed Chaos to regain its kinder sense of self as the benevolent protector of the Chow. Then Tikal just Darth Vaders his ass and they fly off into heaven or something, I presume. Jokes aside though, this was such an amazing peer into Sonic as a character, and it's why so many people hold stories like these to such a high standard when it comes to showcasing it. Someone who cares for those who were wronged, even if they were his enemy before, and opts to help them, rather than simply destroying them or locking them away. That's the good old oppression-hating Sonic that many people came to love. Plus, as a little side note, only because I want this video to be more Sonic focused rather than on the stories of everyone, I just wanted to say that the other characters' stories were pretty great too. I would personally say that Biggs and Knuckles were probably the weakest in this regard, even disregarding the gameplay, but that doesn't mean they were bad, they just didn't reach the level of the others in my mind. Tails and Amy had their arcs of learning how to believe in their own abilities more and becoming capable fighters in their own right, rather than relying solely on Sonic to get things done. And probably the second big highlight of a story to many people, including me, is the classic E102 Gammas. It was a surprisingly sad one considering it's a robot we're following here. Egged on by Amy, We were just watching this Eggman robot start to question its purpose and proceeding to seek out its casted out robot brethren after they were unable to complete the task that Gamma was able to. It saved its Robros by destroying them and freeing the birds inside of each of them, then self-destructing once its mission was complete, realizing that they were once a family. There was something oddly chilling to me as a child when Gamma was listing out the remaining units to destroy, with only Beta and himself, Gamma. But it was a sweet story truly, another one that stuck out in the minds of many despite Gamma being a one-off character, effectively being replaced by Omega. The character work in this game was really great. But getting back on track, let's continue on to the next mainline Sonic game, of course, Sonic Adventure 2. And you know what? That level of quality definitely continued into this game. I mean, how couldn't it when it was the game to introduce the beloved beacon of young edgy fellers worldwide, Shadow the goddamn Hedgehog. But let me pull back before I start getting off track again so soon. This is a Sonic video, I gotta remember that. And like I said, they 100% nailed Sonic in this game too. In fact, I'd say they doubled down in the style and snark department, and once again, you can see that in just the hero story intro alone.
Talk about low budget flights, no food or movies. I'm out of here. I like running better.
Doubly iconic, so iconic that it was even referenced in the recent Sonic 3 movie.
Talk about low budget flights, no food or movies. We're out of here.
Made a lot of sense for them to do that too, considering SA2 was the game they're adapting for this one, and I love them for that. SA2 was my first 3D Sonic game as a kid. No, 3D Blast does not count. So I could be a tad bit biased in saying this, but I'd say this intro is among the best possible introductions to Sonic out of all the games, living up there with CD, Unleashed, and 06 to me personally. They showed us from the get-go that we're following a cool-ass motherfucker right there, and sometimes that's really all you need to hook somebody in for a story. Like, how can you look at that smirk and not feel at least a little bit giddy, man? If you say you don't, you're just lying and you don't know it yet. And then when it comes to Sonic's interactions with practically everyone, those were 100% on point here too. Understandably, the standout being his interactions both with and related to Mr. Shadow over here. But the whole cast was just a joy to watch, honestly. But back to Shadow in particular, they just bounce off of each other so well, especially with the scenes closer to the end of each story. So many classic one-liners and moments from these games came from the back and forths between these two. Just so much fun to see unfold, clunky audio mixing and all. And then when we get to the last story, just like with Adventure, it gets quite a bit darker as we get closer to the truth at the end. In Adventure 1, it was about the Echidna tribe's lust for power and conquest, acting as a catalyst for Chaos's untold rage and thirst for destruction. While here in Adventure 2, it comes to be about Gerald Robotnik, Eggman's grandfather, attempting to exact his revenge on humanity from beyond the grave for destroying and killing everything he held dear, especially his granddaughter Maria, by plummeting the space colony Ark into the Earth and blowing it up using the energy of the Chaos Emeralds. It's genuinely incredible to me how a series following a blue hedgehog and his animal friends can handle juggling such lighthearted fun with these darker topics and subject matter. And that's just part of the charm of the franchise, man. The majority of the game is Sonic Squad racing against the clock to evade capture from both Gun and the police, while tracking down Eggman and his squad. And because they're all together for most of the time this time, we get to see them bounce off of each other a lot more than in the first game, barring maybe Sonic and Tails. And honestly, I think this is one of the Sonic games to do a better job with everyone's dynamics. Honestly, going through the stories of these games again for this video made me remember how much fun it is to talk about all these characters' relationships. I might just have to make that a topic for another video someday. But getting back on track again here, To sum everything up with these two games essentially, Sonic's really fun and cool. The rest of the cast is fun and cool, and the story is fun and cool. I wanted to use these as some prime examples for this era instead of going over every single game, because we'd be here for way longer than however long this video is right now if I did. And I can save that for a sequel video instead. But the thing with these games is that while everyone has their own opinions on them, these are both generally considered some pretty dang good games. Good character work to go along with some pretty well received games. But then what happens when those games are considered to be less than stellar by the general public? What happens to Sonic and his pals in these situations? Well, jumping a few years into the future, we had a pretty mixed bag of games in this time period, and they make for great examples for delving into this question. In particular, I'm talking about 06, Secret Rings, Black Knight, and Unleashed. Now, regardless of how any of us feel about these games, there is an unfortunate fact in that this was a rough time for Sonic's perception to the general public. 06 was a technical disaster and was clowned on not only for that, but the kiss, which, not gonna lie, wasn't a big deal to me personally. I didn't see Sonic and Elise as romantic interests, but I didn't think that little kiss was some affront to God. And then Secret Rings and Black Knight were considered to be average at best, or even despised by some, usually for their use of motion controls. And the common opinion on Unleashed was that the day stages were amazing, while the night stages were abhorrent because werehog slow and stinky. So many games shown with general reactions that range from potentially franchise destroying to good only half of the time. These games, especially 06, left reverberations throughout the franchise that are still echoed even now, as many still look at the franchise today through the lens of how it was nearly 20 years ago, unfortunately. But does a game's reception have to determine how Sonic himself was handled? Well, let's take a little look-see here, though I'm gonna go a little out of order for reasons you'll see in a bit. So we're gonna start with 06. Remember how I said that 06's intro was among some of my favorite in the series? Yeah, there's a damn good reason for that, and that's cause Sonic gets to pop off in this. It starts out pretty calm, just checking out the festivities and whatnot, until inevitably, Eggman pops in just to blow shit up, coming for the princess herself and the Chaos Emerald she holds. And pretty topical that the emerald she has is the deep blue one, cause soon after this, all we see is a blue whirlwind start to form, and who else could that be than our favorite boy, Shadow. Hey, if the world could confuse him for Sonic in SA2, surely I can get a pass. Nah, it's Sonic literally blowing onto the screen. Pause, I think? And just clowning on Eggman's army. That little foot tap he does to knock over that one robot lived in my mind rent-free for years. Then after all that pizzazz, he saves Princess Elise and runs off. Yeah, she gets kidnapped like 2 minutes after this anyways, but hey man, that happens so often in Sonic's story that you could practically consider it a theme all on its own. What a beautiful entrance to the homie regardless though. Yeah, I called him homie, we just tight like that. That's the kind of energy I like to see Sonic have. And I'd say he generally keeps this energy up throughout the story, but I do have to mention a personal peeve with 06. Yeah, go figure, right? And that's with the models. Now for practically everyone but Sonic, I actually like the general look of their models, but I'm not sure what it is about Sonic specifically, it just always looked off to me. But a shared issue amongst all the models to me is that they're very expressionless, very stiff. Like, compare the facial expressions of Sonic's face in this game compared to SA2. I don't know if this is a popular opinion, but the difference is simply night and day in my eyes. There was a lot of expressiveness that they got out of the models in SA2, but the ones in 06 are just kinda bland to me. But that doesn't affect the dialogue or voice work in any way. It's just visually it left me a little less interested in this iteration of Sonic, since his in-game model is what we spend the most time with. But that's just my personal peeve, because character-wise, I'd say they still had a lock on him. I'd even say his most standout moments in the game were with Elise. It let us spend more time with the side of Sonic that's more caring and often helps others become their best selves just by being himself. He helps her become more bold, more willing to express herself, and just more willing to dream. She becomes so attached to Sonic by the end of the final story that right before they're about to effectively reset the timeline, she says this.
I don't care what happens to the world.
And I'd say this mirrors the effect he had on Amy too, who even says something of a similar vein in this very game.
Were you planning to kill him?
He's responsible for destroying my world!
That's crazy! Sonic would never do that.
But it's true! In the near future, his actions will cause the devastation of my world. So I must...
No! I don't believe it. Even if that was true. If I had to choose between the world and Sonic, I would choose Sonic.
Now these lines can easily be misconstrued, making these ladies seem like selfish assholes that would be willing to doom the world in favor of staying with Sonic. But in actuality, this is just them showing how much they both care for and believe in Sonic. In Amy's case, it's more like she's declaring her belief that Sonic is unwavering in his innate knack for just doing the right thing. So even if the world were against him, she would stay by his side. And in Elise's case, if you leave her emotions out of the picture, it does sound pretty crazy. But it was just an outburst of frustration, you gotta understand. Heat of the moment type beat. Like, think about it. The first person in your entire life of... Wait, how old is Elise? Really? 17 years is wild, dog. I thought this was a grown-ass woman my entire life. She was out here holding back a dimensional calamity when she should have been studying for her chem class, god damn. But then this is even more reason to cut her some slack. She didn't actually not care about what happens to the world. She was just frustrated that the person she just met that completely turned her life around was the exact thing that she'd have to give up in order for the world to be at peace. To put this in gooning terms, imagine if you bag Yoruichi and suddenly the universe says, hey man, either erase this entire relationship from the timeline or the world is done. I bet you'd be a little pressed too. And doesn't this speak volumes for Sonic himself? Two people, even one that's known him for just a day or two, are willing to believe in him and his judgment over whatever the world may say. That's powerful. The Sonic effect in full force. 06 may have had a plethora of issues, but the things it got right, it got right. And then we get to the storybook games, and I'm just gonna spoil it for everyone right now. I think these games, plus Unleashed, are where the character of Sonic peaked personally, especially Black Knight, but we'll get there when we get there. These probably aren't unpopular opinions, so a thought might have popped into the brains of a few of you along the lines of, man, that's a cold ass take, dog, get some new material. And to those fellas I say, I'm in your walls. The way Sonic is adapted for these games is actually masterful, and that's not a knock on the previous entries I mentioned at all. I just think it speaks volumes about how well written Sonic is here, that despite so many people ragging on the games themselves, not me though, they're still in big talks even today in a positive light. All of Sonic's greatest qualities are on full display here. His signature snark is at the top of its game, he displays a charisma that would naturally make many like or at least respect him, plenty of damn good one-liners, and probably the most important of all, a show of his unbreakable will and unshakable morals, no matter how dire the situation. Like in Secret Rings, Sonic literally has a fiery time limit placed on his life after jumping in to take a shot meant for Shara. No hesitation in his actions there, and he just met this woman, mind you. Even once he found out what the flame arrow would do, there was no regret or lamenting to be done here. He just immediately sprung back into action. And much closer to the end of the story, when he really started to feel the effects of his time running out, what did he do when Shara started apologizing for possibly being the cause of Sonic's death? Not an ounce of blame came out of that hedgehog's mouth. He did nothing but reassure her that he's locked in and he'll take care of everything. That's my goddamn goat right there, man. He knows he can't look weak in front of the Huzz. And then in the holy grail of his characterization in Black Knight, see what I did there? Because holy grail and medieval, we really get to see Sonic's strong sense of self shine through. When told he'll be the villain in this story for slaying a king, he couldn't care less because he knows it'll be for the good of their world. And when told constantly that he acts unknightly by their world's current standards, he doesn't conform to the falsehood that he's told is just. In fact, he changes the hearts and ideals of those same people by making them realize that there's more to being a knight than blindly following their king. Rather that they shouldn't sacrifice their morality or throw away their lives for nothing, because preserving the good of the kingdom that they serve is a true duty of a knight. Even when given 3 tests by the Lady of the Lake, both in order to learn how to duel Excalibur's power of immortality and to test his strength of knightly character, Sonic never had to change his ways once. Following his heart and his own ways led him to pass all 3 tests with flying colors. I feel like this game also led to some of the most battle shonen-y moments of the franchise, not just because he fought other people of course, but because it led to clashes of ideals that were carried out through their battles. And this was shown nowhere better throughout the game than in the final sequence. Merlina was always one of the most interesting villains in the franchise to me, because she didn't feel like a villain of pure evil. She actually had pretty understandable reasons for doing what she did, even if she ended up veering off the path along the way. She foresaw that her kingdom was destined to fall, and lamenting and fearing that fact led her to searching for a way to preserve her kingdom forever, making it eternal. The only problem is, that essentially required giving up the kingdom to the underworld. It'd keep the kingdom in stasis, even if its people were to suffer for it. Basically everything about this goes against what Sonic stands for, so of course he fought back against her plans, and he tried to knock some sense into her, even though he was completely outmatched. Despite having Caliburn cut in half and getting beaten down within an inch of his life, being begged to give up and retreat, he still kept on fighting. And in the end, it was his unwavering spirit and desire to do what he thought to be right that summoned the power he did need to stop her, manifesting in the form of Excalibur and its rad golden armor. Even after he took her down, he still felt compassion for her because he understood how she fell to the depths that she did. He didn't want to put an end to her, he only wanted to save her.
Merlina, every world has its end. I know that's kind of sad, but that's why we gotta live life to the fullest in the time we have. At least, that's what I figure.
This scene still moves me to this day, man. And it had me feeling something fierce when I first reached it as a kid, helping me realize something important. I'm gonna die? There's a reason why this game held such a special place in my heart, and why that final boss was one of my favorites in the franchise. It wasn't just the gameplay or the theatrics, but the context for it all. The story and the dynamics between these opposing characters. Though I will say that I really do love the song for the final boss as well. It's practically a back and forth between Sonic and Merlina's ideals in musical form.
Don't blame for what I have.
And of course, I also love Live Life that plays throughout the last cutscene and the credits, but I think you can gather what that one's about from the name alone. And let me tell ya, Unleashed Sonic was no slouch either, and honestly, I'd say it was mainly from how him and Chip bounced off of each other. Sure, there were some signs of things to come in this game, but they had it pretty nicely balanced here. Though to keep myself from repeating the same points over and over, I want to zero in on his dynamic with Chip, one scene in particular. But slightly off topic, I gotta say that the intro to Unleashed is quite possibly still my favorite intro to any Sonic game to this day. Really hoping that they start bringing these back for at least some of the upcoming games, cause these went hard. Now to give a quick recap of our boys Sonic and Chip here, after Sonic turns feral from Eggman's natural charms, Eggman sends him a restraining order and launches him into space and plummeting back to Earth. When he lands, he seemingly crushes a little fella, this little fella being Chip, and finds that he can't remember a damn thing. So he brings Chip along with him on his adventure to repair the world that Eggman split apart, in the hopes that someone will recognize Chip along the way. Now fast forward a little bit, and Chip finds out that he's gone. And gets his memories back, I guess. He is the light Gaia to the dark Gaia that Eggman awoke prematurely to split the world apart. Two opposing forces of creation and destruction. It's this realization that leads Sonic to believe that it was Chip protecting him from Dark Gaia's negative influence during Nightfall all this time. But then Chip retorts with this, and honestly, I'm just gonna let this whole rest of the scene play out.
I haven't done anything, Sonic. You're the reason you haven't changed at all. You're too strong to lose yourself.
I'm the reason?
Yeah, you never doubt yourself, no matter what. You never give in to the night or the darkness inside your heart. I think it's because I knew that about you. That's why I wanted you to help me. It's been so fun, getting to see the world. I've lived here since the planet began, but I didn't know a thing about it. That it's so pretty, or that food tastes so good, or that people are so nice. I'm so glad I got the chance to discover all that with you, and I'm so glad that you helped me find my memory. Sonic, I will never, ever forget you. Thank you, Sonic. Goodbye, friend.
Hey!
Whoa, what?
Where do you think you're off to all by yourself?
What? But my memory is back now, and, well, from here on out, it's my responsibility, so, I mean, there's no reason for you to come along, so I should just...
Do I need a reason to want to help out a friend?
Thanks, Sonic.
Such a beautiful, genuine moment between these two, man. Despite Sonic's cocky attitude, he's actually more humble than many may realize. It never occurred to him that it was just him being him that allowed him to resist the negative influence of Dark Gaia. It was Chip who had to make that known to him. And then after Chip feels like he has to leave and perform his duties alone, it's Sonic that had to make it known to Chip that he doesn't have to go it alone. He's got his buddy to help him through it. And I kid you not, that line of, do I need a reason to want to help out a friend? Stuck with me so much as a child that I still live by that mantra now. I never once forgot it. That moved me. Unleashed was just so good. It still pains me whenever I gotta see the ending scenes of this game. I miss you, Chip. I think it speaks to how well the stories and character writing were in these games, that regardless of how people viewed the games overall, good or bad, there's basically a universal praise for how well they wrote the characters. And right after this, we got one of the greatest and most well-received 3D Sonic games to ever release, Sonic Colors. Now see, this is where they fucked up. Now hey, don't get me wrong. Colors? Fantastic game. that hasn't changed in my mind in the slightest, and on a surface level, I don't mind the direction that they took both the characters and the story in this game, but it definitely led to the slippery slope that they would go down for a good while. When I played the game, both then and now, it wasn't like I felt offended with how much more jokey and silly everything was. I kinda see it in a similar way to how I view Sonic Heroes. Just a more lighthearted adventure for the most part, nothing wrong with that. There are still some nice moments in this game, but for the most part, it's just quip central. It felt like they turned up his snark trait and turned all of his other notable traits way down. But, like I said, this game wasn't that egregious in that regard. If I even considered these sorts of things when I was a kid, I probably wouldn't have cared all that much, both because it's rather inoffensive and because I'd assumed that this was more of a one-off kind of deal. Generations would come up next, and while his character was kinda the same here, it was once again rather inoffensive. Plus that was probably mainly because there really ain't that much character to go off of in this game. Story was never Generation's strong suit, and that's perfectly fine for a game like this. 2 games with this new Sonic style now, but hey, it wasn't anything bad, just different. Plus I was sure they'd switch it up again soon, right? But little would I have known, the poor soul. This would be around the time that I fell off with Sonic for many years to come, though not for any particular reason. I just simply wasn't keeping up with anything Sonic for a good while. So it was more so in recent years that I found out about the real nuclear travesties, both story and character-wise, of not even just Sonic honestly, pretty much everyone. Sonic Lost World and Sonic Forces. I think Lost World is the only time in the entire series that a Sonic story actually aggravated me. I'm really not one to get up in arms for things like these, I'm typically a rather chill dude. But this one genuinely ticked me off watching it unfold. Sonic comes off as dumber, more irresponsible, and even quippier than ever. Tails suddenly has a real stick up his two-tailed ass and starts beefing with both Eggman and Sonic for having to work with the Round Man, when they've already done this before, multiple times. Eggman is... he's honestly pretty alright. A far cry from how he'd act in, say, Adventure 2, but they've been leaning into this goofier Eggman for a while now, barring 06, and I think it's alright. Not as menacing, but pretty inoffensive all things considered, except for this scene.
Your efforts are impressive, little hedgehog, but you are destined to fail, as the fat fool has failed before you.
I'll get fat from eating your black hearts, you Eggman wannabes!
Whoa! Your threats are almost as amusing as your mustache. I must commend you on your invention, though. We get stronger and stronger as we leech the life from your dying world.
Yeah, I've noticed.
Where are you gonna live when your world's dead, guys? Oh, right. You've been dead, too. Too bad for you.
I will burn your world, you rebellious scum! I will destroy everything you love and make you watch!
Boss, your hands.
As long as I can still strangle a Zeti, my hands are fine.
That was so wild that it almost felt like how the Eggman of old could get. The Deadly Six are just kinda whatever to me personally. I know they have their fans, but I just don't feel much of anything strongly towards them one way or another. Except for Xena. Xena can hit my line anytime, any place. Knuckles and Amy are in this game too, but they don't really do anything here, and they're quite a shift from their usual selves too. They play a lot more into the hot-headed doofus side of Knuckles, while also being what I believe is the beginning of the Amy stripping. Hey yo, whoa, not that kind of stripping, character stripping! Amy's just kinda nothing here. It was when they started weaning her away from her hyperactive Sonic fan kinda ways, and more into this motherly figure of love that just wants everyone and the animals to be safe. Now mind you, Amy was always a big lover and cared a lot for her friends and animals already, but now it didn't really have a fun balance with her more spunky side anymore. They basically just turned her into the nice mom, and it's just kind of boring. Basically everyone is amongst some of their worst iterations here, and the story could get quite frustrating at times because of it, especially with Tails. I just wanted to grab him by the tails and launch him into orbit with how much he annoyed me. And then Forces came along, and I think they started to catch on that people were growing tired of the goofier, sillier stories, so they opted for a bit of a return to form here, and it kinda landed flat on its face again. Points to them for at least trying to bring back a serious tone, but I think the execution was of questionable quality to say the least. In the first place, even with the more serious Sonic stories, they weren't typically serious for the vast majority of it. In this one, I think they just went too far in this direction, and it ends up coming off as goofy instead. Like, how am I supposed to take the story seriously when characters say stuff like this in such a serious tone?
None of this is good, Vector. That's why it's called war.
And while I know that this is a Sonic-centric video, I don't think I could just ignore the continued degradation of the characters, most notably Tails in my eyes. They've completely relegated him to be the super nerd role by this point, and they wiped away his courage in the process. Why would the same Tails that's been fighting with Sonic since the second game in the franchise be this afraid of fighting his own battles by this point? He had this very arc in Adventure 1, and learning not to rely on Sonic all the time, because he can more than handle himself, if he just believes in his ability to do so. Hell, in Adventure 2, he literally witnessed what he assumed was Sonic's death, and he locked in right there to honor his, at the time, last words by protecting Amy and taking care of Eggman himself. That's metal, dude. If he was able to handle himself so well from so long ago, why now does he whimper, hide, and cry out for Sonic at the hint of any danger? Ever since Unleashed, he's mainly just been the tech dude with his little Miles Electric that he made that became a bit of a mainstay since then. I know we're focusing on Sonic here, but it really is such a shame to see the state that everyone was in by this point. But on that note, moving back to Sonic, we really don't have too much to go off of here either. He's somehow snarkier than ever, but also more milquetoast in his general being. He's cheesy as hell here, second only to his Heroes interpretation I'd say, but it's just missing something that even the Heroes version had. Heroes was incredibly corny, but in a way that's sort of endearing. The cheesiness of Forces Sonic just feels wrong. Corny in a bad way. I'd say Forces overall was less offensive in its interpretations of the characters than Lost World. Not a high bar, I know, but it ended up feeling cringier instead. I think the more serious general tone mixed with the cornier dialogue and ended up creating a cringy amalgamation instead of reaching the storytelling highs of ye olde games of old or the endearing corniness of Heroes. It tried to do it, and it just didn't work in my opinion. This was how Sonic and their buds were stuck as for essentially over a decade, and that's really such a shame. They had so many slam dunks with everyone's characters, not just Sonic's, yet they took a hard shift after Unleashed, and it led to a rather dark age for both the characters and stories. Some good mainline games definitely still came out during these times, no doubt, but Sonic's identity was essentially lost here. Until 2022, nigga. Sonic Frontiers came out and, oh my god, he came back. Our Sonic returned. His voice direction may have been a shock to me when I heard it, and I think the story and characters did still suffer a bit from the Forces effect of being a little too constantly serious, but they pulled it off to a much better degree. Sonic was never just a quip machine, he had heart. An incredibly strong sense of self and an indomitable will that I feel was just lost in these past couple games. But I feel like it finally returned in Frontiers, or at least being set back on the right track. And I'm not even just talking about the Titan fights here. Those did add many points to the cool factor he'd also been missing for a long time, but those weren't the most important parts. We saw him pal it up with his friends in a more natural way than we had in a good while. Save for Amy in my opinion, but that's a tale for another day. We saw how much he also didn't want to worry them with his ever-growing burden of cyber corruption by putting on his usual brave face. And we also got to see his unparalleled ability to push forward, no matter how desperate the situation, no matter how beaten down he is, and no matter how many times he's told his actions are meaningless. And funnily enough, the scene that I feel showcases those last few traits the most is actually a scene where he doesn't talk at all.
Your cyber corruption is accelerating. How can you smile when you can barely stand?
This is much more like the Sonic that I once knew. The Sonic that just does what he has to do, no matter how impossible the odds may seem. The Sonic that inspired me and thousands upon thousands of others to be our best selves, to live our lives to the fullest, to push on even when things may seem bleak, and to never forget to be a good friend to others. The best in you can bring out the best in others. And I think that's something incredibly important to remember, especially in times like these. I think the Sonic we all know and love is back again, and hopefully this time he's here to stay.